Welcome to Latine. Today's video, we're going to look at Latin nouns. And my goal is to teach you what you need to know in order to study and learn Latin nouns effectively. First, let's compare Latin and English nouns. The first thing to keep in mind is that English nouns are not declined, whereas Latin nouns are declined. English uses prepositions. Latin will use cases. This is often a little hurdle for English speakers when they're first introduced to Latin nouns. We are used to having prepositions with our nouns to express different ideas in a sentence. Latin expresses the same ideas, but it uses cases to do this rather than prepositions. Usually, when an English noun changes its spelling, it is in the plural or the possessive. Latin nouns will change their spelling depending on how they are used in the sentence. This is another way of saying the same thing. When we say that Latin uses cases, we are saying that Latin nouns change their spelling depending on if it's the subject, the direct object, if it's showing possession, if it's expressing some type of adverbial idea like means or manner, or if it's the indirect object. All of those different uses, Latin will change the Latin noun will change its spelling, whereas an English noun will use a preposition to express a lot of those things. The pattern of spelling change is called the declension. And so here's some examples of what we just discussed. We're going to look at the English noun earth. And you can see here the English noun earth in these different cases, which are the cases of Latin nouns. Notice that the spelling of earth pretty much stays the same. If you look in the singular column, nominative earth, genitive of earth, dative to earth, the accusative earth, and the ablative by earth. Notice that the noun itself the spelling stays the same, and prepositions are used to express these different ideas. And then, of course, in the plural in English, we add an S and use the same prepositions. Now, if we look at the Latin noun terra, in the same cases, terra, depending on how it's used, whether it's the nominative, which is the subject of the sentence, the genitive, which is the case of shows possession or source, or the dative, which is the indirect object, the accusative, which is the direct object, or the ablative, which is an adverbial type of case. Notice the spelling of the word changes. It takes on different spellings to express these different ideas. Terra in the nominative, terrai in the genitive, terrai, terram in the accusative, and terra in the ablative. So notice, again, as we compare these two, English has these prepositions in the genitive, dative, and ablative cases, whereas Latin simply changes the spelling. Terra, terrai, terrai, terram, terra. And then again, in the plural, we have different endings or different spellings. Nominative, terrai, terrarum, terris, terras, terris. And so you can see English uses prepositions, Latin uses these case endings to express these same ideas. Latin declensions. All Latin nouns are declined, except for those borrowed from Hebrew, most of which you will find in the Biblia Vulgata and Ecclesiastical Latin. The Biblia Vulgata is the Vulgate version of the Bible. translated by Jerome, and it is a beautiful example of Christian Latin. It's very much worth your time to purchase a copy if you can and read it for yourself. So these Hebrew words are typically the ones that will not be declined, but we won't go into that. There are 5 declensions of Latin nouns, and each has a unique feature that distinguishes it from the others. So there are 5 regular patterns of declension, of spelling change in Latin nouns. This unique feature is the genitive form, and what this means is each of the 5 declensions has a unique genitive form. Depending on what genitive form a Latin noun has, that will tell you what declension it belongs to. And once you know the declension that it belongs to, then you know the endings that are appropriate for it. For example, we have some Latin nouns here. Terra, terrai. Victoria, victoriae. Roma, Romae. Catalina, Catalinae. All of these nouns are first declension nouns. And we know that because they all have the genitive ending. Terrae, victoriae, Romae, Catalinae. They all have the first declension genitive singular ending. Therefore, when learning a Latin noun, you must memorize the genitive along with the nominative. We will talk about this later on in this video, but this is vitally important for beginning your study of Latin nouns. Declensions continued. Thus, when you learn a Latin noun, it will not be enough to know that terra means earth. This is a common mistake because typically in English that is sufficient. Because as I mentioned earlier, in English we use prepositions, but Latin uses cases. And so to master a Latin noun, you need to be able to decline it fully. In order to do that, you will also need to know that terra means earth and that terrae is its genitive form. This holds true for all Latin nouns and will save you many headaches later on. I cannot emphasize this enough for the beginning Latin student. And I'll show you later on in the video a good way to do this, but just know at this point you need to learn terra means earth, terrae is the genitive. The genitive not only tells you the declension that a noun belongs to, it also tells you the root or stem, some call it a stem, of the word to which the endings are attached. This is critical for the beginning student. So the genitive form is where we get the stem from. We do not get the stem from the nominative singular form. Therefore, to properly learn the Latin noun terra, you should learn the nominative, genitive, the meaning, and the gender. This may seem like a lot, but at the end I will summarize with a sample flashcard that will cover all of this. Nouns and gender. Like many English nouns, Latin nouns carry gender. We don't often recognize this about English nouns, but you have experienced this and you've been exposed to this. For instance, when a ship is referred to in the feminine, the earth is sometimes called Mother Earth, so there's a feminine idea there. Soldiers are generally referred to in the masculine. So English nouns carry gender, but for us in English, the gender of English nouns doesn't really have a lot to do with the grammar. In Latin, however, all Latin nouns carry a gender, and this is a grammatical category, which helps us to further distinguish Latin nouns from each other. So every Latin noun will have a certain gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, and that's something that needs to be learned about the noun. There are several methods for mastering Latin gender. Most often, though, these methods increase your workload when learning Latin vocabulary. There have been systems that have been derived for determining the gender of a noun based on its termination or based on its declension. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. I think they tend to increase your workload. Therefore, well, we'll come back to that. The gender of Latin nouns has some rational basis most of the time, and therefore can be used as an aid in memorization. In other words, what this means is that the gender of Latin nouns is not random. It's not just a shot in the dark or a dart thrown at a wall. There is some rational basis for why a certain Latin noun has the gender that it has. General observations on gender in Latin nouns. As I mentioned before, there's usually some basis in common sense for the gender assigned to a Latin noun. This common sense is based on the natural understanding of the differences between the sexes. While this is not politically correct in today's climate, it is nonetheless true. This is a sign of the craziness of the modern day, that the natural differences between the sexes, male and female, is so under attack that even writing this sentence that I wrote in this video is probably going to get me banned from YouTube or something terrible like that. But I think for those of you who are watching this and have a modicum of common sense, you'll recognize that there are fundamental differences, and those differences are part of the way God has made us male and female, and that's reflected in why Latin nouns have the gender that they have. So here's an example. Exemplio gratia. For example, terra is feminine, ager is masculine, and humum is neuter. Terra, a feminine noun, it means earth, but the idea behind terra is the earth as a fruitful, fertile place that produces just of its own fertility trees and plants and all kinds of beautiful green things, fruits of the earth, and different good things like that that grow out of the earth. I live in the state of Georgia, and one of the things I love about living in Georgia is that it is covered in trees. Georgia is a very fertile state. We receive lots of rain. It's warm, but that promotes growth of the forests and things, and it's just a very fertile area. And that's the idea behind terra, and that's a feminine idea. Ager is masculine, and ager is a field. But the idea behind ager is it's not just a wild pasture or an uncultivated forest, but it is a regimented, tilled, disciplined, so to speak, in a metaphorical sense, field where a farmer is working. A farmer has taken the raw land and he's tilled it and plowed it and fenced it in and fertilized it, and he's working it and he's disciplining it, and he's bringing out the natural fertility through the discipline of farming, and that's what an ager is. This is the word that we get agriculture from. And this is a masculine idea, that the regimented, disciplined, if you can think about plowed rows of crops, the orderliness and the, as I said, regimented nature of a field that looks like that, and that's masculine. It is fertile, it brings forth life, but it is a more regimented area than just the wild terra. And finally, humum is neuter, and humum means dust. Humum, it's just simply dirt. doesn't necessarily bring forth any life. It's not fertile. The idea with humum is that it's just dirty, it's dusty. And so there's no life that comes out of it. It's just dirt. The reason I use these three nouns as an example of the differences between the genders in Latin nouns is that all of them can be translated to mean earth. Terra can be earth, ager can be earth as in ground, and humum can be earth as in dirt. And yet the gender gives us different shades of meaning to the word. Sometimes, however, there is no apparent rationality for the gender that a Latin noun carries. It is therefore best to memorize the gender along with the meaning of the word. And the more you do this, the more you work with it, the more you get into this discipline, you will just begin thinking about Latin nouns and their gender. Summary of Latin nouns. Latin nouns change their spelling depending on use in the sentence. Latin nouns belong to one of 5 declensions, each of which has a special feature that distinguishes them from the others. This special feature is the genitive form. Latin nouns also carry gender. Gender should be learned along with the meaning of the word and the genitive form. Example flashcard. When you're going through your vocabulary work in Latin, you should be making handwritten flashcards, and I want to give you a sample of what those flashcards should look like. So on the front of the card, you want to write the nominative singular and genitive singular form. Terra, terrai. Terra, terrai. That goes on the front. On the back of the card, you put the definition, earth, the gender, feminine, and if you want to, you can add the first declension that tells you it's part of the first declension. In a future video, we'll talk about declining and what that is. But this is the basics for working with Latin nouns in your vocabulary. Make flashcards that look like this. On the front, terra, terrai. On the back, earth, feminine, first declension. If you discipline yourself to doing this and are consistent in the habit, you will succeed in learning Latin nouns. Thanks for watching. Wale.